Welcome to Face the State. I'm Ariana Bennett. Thank you for joining us. Well, the state of Nevada collects more than $6 billion in taxes every year, and that comes from a whole lot of different sources. And while we know that our taxes pay for things like schools, police, and roads, there's probably a lot that most of us don't know about where our tax dollars go. We'll get some of those questions answered in this episode. Now, some of you may recognize Bill Anderson, our guest, as our former state economist. He's here now as the director of the State Department of Taxation. Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Ariana.
No, it's great to have you. Last time I had you on, you were the state economist. So why the shift?
Well, I was approached by the governor's office when the prior director moved on, and they asked me if I would be interested. They assured me that there was a good staff to help me at the department, and that's been proven correct. We have a little over 400 plus employees, and they work very hard and serve the citizens of the state well.
Now, you have many years of economics background. How does that apply to taxes? Are they related, or is it a totally different field for you?
No, they're related. In all honesty, I'm a numbers guy, so I love playing with the numbers, and so there is a lot of crossover. But the programs are different, especially marijuana. It's brand new, and everybody's kind of learning on the fly, both the industry, the businesses, the Department of Taxation, as we roll this industry out. So it's, based on a common set of knowledge, but it's also new. Yeah,
we're definitely going to get to into the weeds, so to speak, about marijuana in the other half of this episode. But just generally, one of the numbers that I think you probably look at a lot is taxable sales, and what that number is doing. It's been a really positive story for Nevada for many years now. We've had growth in taxable sales.
Right. What we're seeing right now is really an unprecedented run-up in taxable sales. Specifically, in April, we realized an 8.6% increase in taxable sales compared to a year ago. We're now on a streak of 94 straight months of taxable sales growth, and I think that's reflective of the broad-based strength in the economy as a whole. As we've talked about before, the job picture is positive. Visitation numbers are holding fairly steady at near record levels, and our taxable sales continue to grow.
Yeah, now for those who didn't just do the mental math, that's almost 8 years of taxable sales increases. That takes us all the way back to 2010, of course, when we kind of bottomed out after the recession. So have we recovered fully in our sales tax revenue since then?
Yes, we certainly have. In fact, we've grown by a little more than 50% over that period dating back to around 2010. So we've got all that money back that we lost during the recession.
Okay, now this is kind of a weird question, but in terms of how much tax income we get in Nevada, is that equitable, would you say, per capita to other states, or is it more or less?
Well, it's very different because Nevada is not a personal income tax state. Our tax structure is very different from the rest of the nation. I can tell you that in terms of taxable sales and sales tax growth, our growth has been stronger than in the nation as a whole. But we have marijuana, we have gaming, that makes our tax structure considerably different than where it is nationally.
Now, not having the personal income tax and compared to other states being very business friendly in terms of taxes, that's revenue that we're not getting. So is that a feasible model moving forward as our economy is changing? We're becoming less focused on gaming and more focused on other industries. Can Nevada continue kind of in this unusual tax structure?
Well, Nevada's tax structure is changing and diversifying just as the economy is. If you look at the structure of our sales tax base especially, you see a reflection of the diversifying economy. We're seeing very broad-based growth across just about all industries. But it's not just the consumer-driven industries that we're seeing growth from. We're seeing growth in our high-tech manufacturing and professional service, business-related services, things of that nature. We're seeing growth very broad-based on a geographic basis. In fact, the most pronounced growth that we're seeing in taxable sales is in the state's rural counties. So they're benefiting from the improvement in the overall economy as well.
Okay, so I guess my question is then, do you see a future in which Nevada would need to implement a personal income tax in order to make up for losses in other areas? Sounds like maybe not the case since we're doing well.
I would be very surprised if that happened in the foreseeable future here in Nevada.
Okay, I'm sure a lot of people feel pretty good about that. Okay, and so in general, I mean, from obviously your position of being an economist, Nevada's economy is looking very strong.
Yes, it is. Employment's at a record high. Unemployment is down drastically from where we were at the height of the recession. Our job growth is essentially the strongest in the nation. So when you put all of these pieces of the puzzle together, the labor markets, what's happening with taxation, what's happening in housing, you put them all together, and Nevada's got a very strong economy right now.
Yeah. Now, when you look at the taxes specifically, it's not just sales tax. The taxable income that comes to the state comes from, I think, 17 different sources, 17 different taxes.
Yeah, we collect a wide variety of taxes. About 2/3 of it is sales tax related, whether it's state sales tax or local sales tax. But we bring in about $6.5 billion a year. About 2/3 of that is sales tax. Other major sources are the modified business tax, the insurance premium tax, the commerce tax of late. So we collect a large volume of tax dollars from a wide variety of sources.
And then once the tax dollars come to the state, where do they go from there?
Well, surprisingly, I mean, even though we are a state agency, a little more than half of the taxes that we collect are redistributed back to local governments, including school districts. Only in the low 40% actually stays with the state general fund. So we collect about $4.5 billion in sales tax. A little more than $1 billion of that goes directly to the state. The rest gets dispersed out to various local governments.
Now, is that how local governments predominantly get their funding, or do they have taxes that go directly to them?
Well, they have property taxes. They have our sales taxes, so that they have their own income streams that sometimes they're the same as in the state, sometimes different.
But the state is predominantly in charge of funding education, right?
Well, the state plays a role with that, and we collect local school support taxes. The state general fund tax is about 2%. The local school support tax portion of the sales tax is 2.6%. So we collect that money, and then that's redistributed back to the counties and then to school districts.
Okay, and then how much of the state's overall tax money gets sent toward education, or what percentage?
Well, again, about 2/3 of the taxes that we collect are from sales tax, and the largest portion of that goes to the local, is generated via the local school support tax. That goes back to the school districts, but they have numerous other funding sources, not just the sales tax that we collect.
So it's not, basically it's not a majority of the money that the state is collecting heading toward education. It's a relatively small percentage.
Well, it really depends on how you look at it. You know, we're looking at roughly $1.5 billion a year that we collect in local school support tax that finds its way back to local school districts, but there are some other funding sources as well that we're not involved with.
Yeah. Now, what about the commerce tax? This is one that's been kind of embattled. It's been on the campaign trail a lot. Every primary candidate for governor on the Republican side pretty much said they'd want to get rid of the commerce tax. How much of that what percentage of our total taxable income is the commerce tax?
Well, we bring in about roughly $200 million a year in the commerce tax, and in fact, we've just entered into that tax season. Taxpayers are already remitting their tax returns from last year. So brings in about 200 million. That's about 3% of what we collect as a whole by the department.
Okay, so 3%, it's not a negligible amount, but it's small enough that, I mean, could that hole be filled with something else if it did go away?
Well, that's a policy decision. Our role is to implement policy. And we collect monies as directed by state officials, both in the executive branch and in the legislature. So whether that hole can be filled is really, if that tax goes away, is a decision that will be made by policymakers. We will implement that policy as directed.
Okay, so of the whole pot of money that comes in annually, how much of that is immediately put back into the budget? Is any of it withheld for any kind of investment or savings?
Well, about 40 to 45% of our tax collections at our department go to fund the state's general fund, basically to fund the state's general operating expenses, whether it's education, whether it's corrections, whether it's health related. So that's a pretty sizable chunk. And then besides the taxes that we collect, the other major source would be the gaming taxes collected by the Gaming Control Board.
Okay. Now, in the past few years, the state has used tax incentives kind of as a way to draw new businesses in, under the promise that the money lost in tax income would be made up by economic gain, basically. Do you have any indication of whether that's working?
Well, we can look at one of the statistics that we talked about earlier. The state does have some economic development related sales tax abatement programs. But despite all of that, we've actually grown for 94 straight months. So when we look at the overall picture, the positives right now obviously outweigh the negatives.
Yeah, kind of hard to say whether, you know, one would outweigh the other because it's a long-term, you know, thing. Not a
it's very much a long-term investment.
Okay, and then finally, this just recently happened, but the Supreme Court came down with a decision that that states could start charging income or sales tax on purchases made online. It was Wayfair v. South Dakota, I think. So how will this affect Nevada? Do you anticipate a whole bunch more sales tax money coming from online sales?
Well, we as a department we weren't quite sure which way that court decision would go, but we have over the past several months established a team to take a look at the issue and respond to it once we knew what the end result was. The Supreme Court ruled that states are allowed to tax out-of-state online retailers. Now, we already collect some taxes from those taxpayers, so we're a little bit ahead of the game in that regard. But we think that, you know, we're looking at, you know, a few tens of millions of dollars potentially in additional sales tax revenues that we would be collecting. So we're actively working right now to assess the operational impacts, what we need to do to gear up to facilitate those collections as quickly as possible.
All right. Well, anything else generally that you'd like the public to know about your department before we go to break?
Well, I think everything is going well. As I said earlier, we have a great staff. We do a very efficient job of collecting public monies.
Okay. Bill, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, sit tight. Coming up on Face the State, one new source of revenue for the state is outperforming the estimates. We'll talk about Nevada's new marijuana industry right after the break.